You know that moment when someone you admired turns out to be deeply flawed? When the shine of stardom reveals something darker underneath? Frank Sinatra was one of the greatest voices America ever produced. But the man behind that velvet voice carried secrets that exposed not just his obsessions, but an entire era's toxic relationship with women in power. This isn't about music. This is about control, insecurity, and what happens when fame shields a man from ever hearing the word no. And it all comes down to something shockingly petty. 5 legendary actresses, 5 brutal judgments, and one man's desperate need to tear down anyone who made him feel something real. Frank Sinatra didn't just perform perfection, he demanded it in every corner of his existence. 3 wardrobe changes daily. Showers before intimacy, showers after. A cologne collection worth more than what most families earned in years. His valet revealed that Frank's nose didn't just detect scents. It controlled his entire world, dictated his relationships, destroyed his connections with the women who mattered most. Late into the night, when the scotch loosened his tongue and only his inner circle remained, Sinatra would launch into brutal assessments of the women he'd loved. The same leading ladies he'd kiss on stage with charm and grace became targets of vicious commentary the moment the curtain fell. One member of his entourage remembered watching Frank scrub his hands raw for an hour, ranting about a woman's smell after holding her hand in public view. Tonight we're exposing the 5 Oscar-winning actresses who topped his secret list of olfactory nightmares. Women whose goddess-like public images concealed what Sinatra described as personal horrors. This comes straight from those who witnessed his unfiltered confessions. And what it reveals goes far deeper than a sensitive nose. It exposes a man so terrified of vulnerability that he weaponized every sense he had. His drummer put it perfectly after 15 years watching Frank up close. Frank could control everything. The lighting, every musical note, the temperature of every room he entered. Everything except his own heart. And that drove him mad. When a woman got past his defenses, when she made him feel something he couldn't manage, he'd fixate on some physical flaw. The stronger his feelings, the crueler his words. Nobody made Sinatra feel more than these 5 women. And nobody endured his sensory cruelty more severely. Let's start with Shelley Winters. Wild, unpredictable, completely uncensored. Frank said kissing her felt like licking an ashtray wrapped in wet dog. Shelley exploded into his life in 1950 as everything he wasn't. Where Frank pressed his pants while wearing them, Shelley rolled out of bed into whatever clothes hit the floor first. A makeup artist who worked with both remembered Frank's terror of her chaotic energy. Her apartment looked like a natural disaster struck a thrift shop. Same dress for 3 days running. Garlic on her breath and laughter in your face. It was psychological warfare against everything Frank represented. Their affair burned hot and crashed hard. Publicly, Sinatra blamed scheduling conflicts. Privately, he launched detailed critiques that became legendary whispers. Her brilliance on screen couldn't mask what Frank claimed was an apartment smelling of old soup and hairspray. He'd return from her place and shower for 45 minutes straight, muttering about contamination like she carried disease. Years later, Shelley admitted she provoked him deliberately. She knew it drove him insane when she ate with her fingers, so she'd order the messiest food possible. The man existed in such suffocating perfection. Someone needed to ruffle him. Their relationship never stood a chance. As Frank allegedly told his valet, they had their moment in the 50s. It didn't last. Neither did the air freshener. Then there was Ziza Ziza Gabor. If Shelley represented natural human scent taken to extremes, this Hungarian bombshell occupied the opposite end of Frank's nightmare spectrum. Chemical overload. Synthetic perfume that Sinatra claimed could clear an entire ballroom. She bathed in Chanel, soaked herself in powder, reapplied every 20 minutes like armor. Frank complained to his band after one suffocating date night. He didn't know if he was dating a woman or walking through airport duty-free. 6 weeks in 1954. That's how long their relationship lasted. About 5 weeks longer than Sinatra's sinuses could endure, according to his personal assistant. He'd return from evenings with Gabor with bloodshot eyes, handkerchief pressed permanently to his nose. Behind all that glamour, Frank described a cloud of chemical warfare. The scent clung to his clothes so persistently he once burned a $600 tuxedo rather than have it cleaned. The dry cleaner couldn't kill it. Nothing could kill it. That perfume survived like a cockroach after nuclear winter. The breaking point came during a Palm Springs weekend when Gabor spritzed perfume on his pillow as a romantic gesture. Sinatra spent the night in another bedroom and ended things the next morning. A chef who worked in Frank's home remembered him sending back plates 3 days after seeing her, claiming they were contaminated with her scent. Eventually, they realized it existed only in Frank's head, but you never questioned his senses if you wanted to keep your job. Number 3 will break your heart. Judy Garland. Frank loved her talent more than almost anyone's. but not her energy, not her scent. He described her as a nervous breakdown in heels and said she carried all that stress in her sweat. Their connection transcended romance. They recognized identical demons in each other, the same insecurities, the same self-destructive patterns. Their performances together created magic that still echoes through entertainment history. But behind closed doors, Sinatra couldn't handle the physical manifestation of Judy's internal chaos. Benzedrine, bourbon, and stage panic do not mix well. That's what Frank told his entourage after a particularly difficult week with Garland in 1954. Their duets were electric. The dressing room, not so much. According to those closest to him, Sinatra's complaints about Judy reflected his terror of confronting his own demons. In her, he saw a mirror reflecting his worst fears about himself. Frank was running from the same darkness catching up with Judy, his road manager explained. When he talked about her smell, he was really talking about his own fear. She represented what happened when you lost control. And control meant everything to Frank. His descriptions of Judy's scent became disturbingly clinical. He'd categorize components with chilling precision. 40% pharmaceutical, 30% fear, 20% booze, 10% talent burning too bright. The cruel irony? Sinatra fought identical battles with pills, alcohol, crippling performance anxiety, but he channeled his struggles into obsessive cleanliness instead of surrender. What made Judy's position on his list particularly tragic was that he genuinely loved her, perhaps more authentically than any woman except his final wife. But his inability to separate the person from the sensory experience created a barrier he couldn't overcome. If this story about Frank Sinatra's hidden cruelty touches your heart, please share it with someone who needs to understand how power distorts even the most talented among us. Now we come to someone shocking. Marilyn Monroe. Yes, that Marilyn. Frank adored her. But he was brutally honest behind closed doors. He once told a friend she smelled like beauty and breakdown combined. Long days, panic sweats, melting makeup. He described it as sweet rot he couldn't ignore. No entry on Sinatra's list shocked his inner circle more than Marilyn, America's ultimate fantasy. The woman whose image hung in barracks and boardrooms worldwide. According to Frank, she was a sensory disappointment he couldn't reconcile with her visual perfection. A makeup artist who worked with both explained that Frank expected Marilyn to smell like the fantasy she projected. Some impossible combination of vanilla, sensuality, and innocence. When he discovered she was a real woman with real bodily functions, he almost couldn't process it. Their brief affair in 1961 coincided with Monroe's increasing dependence on prescriptions and alcohol. Substances that Sinatra claimed altered her natural scent in ways he found increasingly unbearable. She was iconic, but even icons sweat through silk. That's what Sinatra remarked to confidants. He described in clinical detail how Monroe's carefully constructed perfection would deteriorate through long days. Makeup melting, perspiration accumulating, the pharmacy of pills exuding through her pores. Frank said she smelled like a beautiful department store an hour before closing. All those expensive perfumes mixing with human reality after the air conditioning failed. What made Monroe's case particularly revealing was Sinatra's inability to separate fantasy from biological truth. His complaints focused specifically on the gap between expectation and experience, the cognitive dissonance between perfect image and imperfect human. Frank couldn't forgive Marilyn for being mortal, his longtime physician observed. He'd built her up as this flawless creation, and the perfectly normal human scent she produced shattered that illusion. It wasn't about her. It was about his own impossible expectations. But none of them compared to number one. Ava Gardner, the love of his life. The woman who, according to Frank, smelled like war itself. Their passion was nuclear. Fights legendary. But he told friends Ava was all gin, cigarettes, and fury. He once said he could never quit her, but he could barely breathe around her. She broke his heart and his sinuses. No woman occupied Frank Sinatra's senses more completely than Ava Gardner. Their relationship, spanning their tempestuous marriage and the complicated decades that followed, represented the central emotional conflict of his entire existence. He never got over her. According to his inner circle, he never stopped complaining about her scent. Ava was Frank's addiction, his road manager explained. And like any addict, he built up a toxic love-hate relationship with his drug of choice. His obsession with how she smelled was really about his helplessness around her. He couldn't control his feelings, so he focused obsessively on controlling his environment. Sinatra's descriptions of Gardner's scent became increasingly elaborate as years passed. What began as simple complaints about cigarettes and alcohol evolved into detailed taxonomies. Inventories that revealed far more about his emotional state than her personal hygiene. At his most poetic, usually after several drinks, he described her scent as the perfume of self-destruction. fragrance he found simultaneously repulsive and irresistible. Frank said kissing Ava was like licking an ashtray while being punched in the heart. But he'd get this look when he said it, a musician remembered. Like he was talking about something he still craved more than oxygen. What distinguished Gardner from everyone else on his list was fundamental ambivalence. With other women, his sensory complaints represented straightforward rejection. With Gardner, they were complicated by continuing desire, a complexity that tormented him long after their marriage ended. He never resolved Ava, his psychiatrist observed. That unresolved quality expressed itself through physical fixation. He could dismiss other women by saying they smelled bad. But with Ava, the smell became part of why he couldn't let go, as though her scent had branded him permanently. Gardner remained at the top of Sinatra's list until his death, not because her physical scent was objectively worse, but because it had embedded itself most deeply in his sensory memory, inseparable from his emotional vulnerability. So what does all this really mean? Frank Sinatra built his entire existence around control. He controlled his voice with mechanical precision. He controlled rooms through sheer personality. He controlled his image down to the millimeter fold of his pocket square. Obsessive rehearsal. Terrorizing musicians who missed notes. The only thing Frank Sinatra couldn't control was his heart. His fixation on women's scent was never about hygiene, his psychiatrist explained. It was emotional self-defense. When someone got past his armor, when they made him feel something he couldn't manage, he'd retreat into hypercritical sensory judgments. It was safer to say she smells bad than to admit she makes me feel vulnerable. This pattern appeared most dramatically with women who threatened his emotional equilibrium. The more power a woman held over Sinatra's feelings, the more likely she ended up on his list. Not because she actually offended his nose, but because she'd penetrated defenses he spent a lifetime constructing. Frank weaponized his sensitivity. His ears could detect a slightly flat note in a 40-piece orchestra. His tongue could identify specific vineyards in blind tastings. His nose could distinguish cologne brands from across rooms. These weren't party tricks, they were control mechanisms. By reducing complex emotional connections to simple sensory complaints, Sinatra created the illusion of choice in relationships where he often felt powerless. He wasn't rejecting these women, their scents were simply incompatible with his refined sensibilities. A fiction protecting his ego from the more threatening reality of emotional dependency. The women who made his smell list were exactly the women who made him feel something genuine. The stronger the feeling, the more elaborate the complaint. Ava topped the list because she colonized his heart most completely. His nose was just a convenient scapegoat. But here's the real stench in this story. It isn't coming from 5 legendary actresses. It's emanating from the toxic combination of unchecked male power, enabling entourages, and Hollywood's machinery of selective truth. Frank Sinatra could maintain these private assessments precisely because the system protected men like him. Cultural icons whose commercial value insulated them from consequences of private behavior. Nobody ever told Frank no. Not his mother, not the studios once he became valuable, certainly not the men who surrounded him. He existed in an accountability-free zone where his perceptions, no matter how warped by insecurity or ego, were treated as objective reality. If this story revealed something important about power, vulnerability, and the price of fame, please like this video, subscribe to our channel, and share it with someone who needs to understand that even our greatest icons are deeply, complicatedly human. Thank you for watching.